Hello and welcome to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estridge. Each week I'll have the privilege of talking with some of the biggest names from the worlds of media, politics, and law. Nothing is off the table. I'll be speaking my mind and encouraging my guests to do so too. Today I'm joined by one of the smartest political consultants around the block. He's the president and founder of the Corcoran Street Group in Washington, D.C. He's been around the Hill. He's been around Democratic campaigns. He's been around the block. And you see him on Fox News, you hear about him, you read about him. And I am just thrilled to welcome Brad Howard back to No Holding Back.
Thank you, Susan.
Brad,
I appreciate
thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I've got the New York Times today's paper in front of me in the background. This will probably go up in a day or two. And its headline is Biden faces more calls to drop out as allies remain uneasy. What's going on around the water fountain in Washington these days?
Yeah, I think, for a while we've seen in the polling focus groups that age has been a consistent concern for President Biden. I think ever since he decided to run again, it has been the top issue among voters, among swing voters since the very beginning. That has not changed. And it did not change after the debate, which is pretty interesting. If you look at the polling numbers, in fact, some polls show that Joe Biden picked up a few points among swing voters in the debate. And it's because it may be a shock to any of us who follow politics very closely, who live and breathe it, but it's because they are by definition swing voters because they have not yet made up their mind. They know how bad Donald Trump is. They don't like him. They don't like his style, but they have big concerns about Biden's age, and that's why they're swing voters. So when they saw what we saw Thursday night, that was not a shock to swing voters. It was a shock to the base who has been told and reassured time and again that he is up to the challenge, and we've only really seen him in very scripted settings. And so I think by that disconnect between what the base thought to be true and what was true was jarring. And I think that's what shocked. That's what was the shock to the system. So I think that's why what you're seeing here is not yet people pulling the firearm collectively yet, because we've not seen any down ballot implications of this yet. And so I think that's why you don't see, like, for instance, a lot of moderates coming out and saying, you need to step aside. There's not a cohesive group yet that's emerged as any collective entity calling for him to step aside. Now, I think that's for a couple of reasons. I think number one is there's just a colossal amount of uncertainty. Should he step aside? Like, there's not sure, we're going to have a convention in mid-August, but this is unprecedented. We've never had a situation in modern era where we've had into an open or what's called brokered convention. And then, from there, no one really knows how that works. That uncertainty, I think, is what's keeping a lot of Democrats at bay. It's almost, we'll go with what we know rather than roll the dice on what we don't know. And also, kudos to the White House over the last week and a half who've really woken up as a campaign. I think you're starting to see them do much smarter things than they did before. He's out there more aggressively. He's out there more kind of fluidly, without scripts. And we're going to have a big press conference tomorrow. I think that'll be kind of the final consideration, this effort. And I think too, the kill shot to this early effort was when they got the Black Caucus to firmly support the president. So right now, not a single Black Caucus member has come out in favor of him stepping aside, even with Kamala Harris waiting in the wings, which is surprising to many. What that did is kind of box in Leader Jeffries in the House Democratic leader. That kind of gave him the fortitude to stand up and say, I don't think Biden should go. And I think on the other side of the hill, you've got the U.S. Senate. Not a single U.S. senator has directly and publicly called for him to step aside. Now, a lot of folks have expressed concern and frustration and alarm, but you've not quite seen that high-level, broad-based call for him to step aside. And I think as long as that holds, as long as we stay at the status quo, that's what's going to happen. And I think the window to replace the nominee, I think, closes by the end of this week, if certainly not next week.
I'm worried. I lived through campaigns where the candidate, engaged in behavior that was very detrimental to the campaign, and it hurt tremendously, and everybody would call me and tell me this is what he should do and what he should not do, and he's doing everything wrong. And they didn't have the guts to tell him, and they didn't say it publicly. And I worried that there was a sort of false sense of blind loyalty that you're supposed to stand by your man no matter what. And that leads to defeat. I saw today Representative Nancy Pelosi suggesting Mr. Biden should reconsider running. And I give her a lot of credit for being willing to say that publicly. Shouldn't he? I mean, what we saw on that debate stage was terrifying. And I feel like, the Biden people who protected him from the public seeing the real questions of his age maybe have done us a disservice.
I mean, Susan, you of all people know too how important it is to make these candidates watch their debate performance and learn from it, because oftentimes you don't have to comment. I've set candidates down and didn't have to say anything. They just saw the error or the areas for improvement. It's just hard not to witness it. And I think anybody who watches that debate, and I would hope the president, if he watches it, wouldn't need comment.
He said he hadn't watched it.
I know, that's what's baffling to me. So, I would make him watch it.
Made him sit down and watch it.
I would hope they would. But I think, but again, what Pelosi is saying is very careful. She's not calling on him to step aside yet. She's encouraging him to just reconsider it, which is a very kind of polite way of saying, I think you need to go. But again, it's not direct. And so,
Shouldn't they be more direct if they think that we're going to lose? I mean, I worry that the polls always take a little while to sink in, and that not everybody knew what to think when they watched the debate. But hearing this drumbeat, there were Representative Pat Ryan, I guess, came out today urging Biden to drop out. George Clooney, who did the big fundraiser out here 2 weeks ago, urged him to drop out. I worry that the polls are going to come. I've seen it take a little while for the polls to set in, but I worry that he's going down, that Trump's got control of the Republican Party, that he's gotten the platform so that it now reflects, exactly what he wants it to say. He got the right to life groups to stand down. He diluted the gay marriage stuff. That Trump has got the Republican Party marching in lockstep. He's going to come into a convention and probably do well. How do you do poorly at your own convention? And that Biden is going to sink in the polls.
Well, look, I don't think you're going to see a dramatic reaction in the polls to the debate among swing voters, again, because this is not a new concern for them. That debate performance just solidified what the concerns they've had all along about his age, so it doesn't alter their calculation. My concern is the down ballot implications from this angle, because what's interesting about Trump and Biden is neither of them really have coattails that help elect people, and they don't have coattails that bring people down. You don't see the down ballot effect that, for instance, Barack Obama had, where we had historic losses in the House, and being branded an Obama Democrat was the end of your career in a lot of rural and suburban areas. We're not seeing that with Biden, because the top concern over Biden is not his politics or his partisanship, it's his age, and that doesn't translate down ballot. However, what we are seeing is a phenomena where voters see what they saw on Thursday night, and their reality, if it doesn't match, if what they saw, if their Democratic member of Congress, it says everything's fine, there's no concerns about his age, I think he's capable and fit to be president, the voters are going to see that and say, like, you can't be serious, like, you've got to have some concerns, because what I saw Thursday night was not good. And at that point, the mindset changes to where it's not just about a Biden, it's about the down ballot candidate, Democratic candidates, and their judgment and their character. Like, if you really think he's fine, then I'm starting to question your judgment and your character as a politician. That will be the long-term down ballot impact. It won't be necessarily tied to his age. It'll be that if Democrats are presenting a different reality than voters live in and see, that's the disconnect that loses you elections. And so I think the president not only has to prove that he's up for this job, I think the campaign has to roll out a way that they're going to address his age from now until November, because you need both. You can't just do one. You can't just convince Democrats to fall in line, because the moderates are going to say, where's your plan to address your age? Like, how are you going to get him out there? How are you going to show that his youthful energy and the stamina to be president for 4 more years? Because if Democrats don't do that, the polling is showing that we will go down in historic defeat and elect a fascist for president. And I think that is what's really at heart of this debate with a lot of Democrats. We love Joe Biden. He's had an amazing tenure as president. He's a good, decent, hardworking, honest man. And he has overcome a lot of challenges in his life. Age is something we all face, and you can't overcome that. And so I think it is not on the Democratic Party's insiders or base or voters to do any arguing here. It is up to the White House to convince us that our concerns are valid, and here's how they're going to address these concerns, and then here's how they're going to win. And if he doesn't do those three things, this is going to linger. Even if he emerges as the nominee, these concerns and anxiety are going to linger until November. And not only is the president going to have an issue where he's lost some young voters over the issue of Israel, though I strongly support President Biden and every action he took so far in defending Israel, but that hurt us with some, young progressive voters. So you've got a base problem in the sense of that. Then you've got a base problem in the sense that some are starting to have concerns about his age and losing enthusiasm. Not to mention that Trump is very competitive among swing voters right now, and how you have those stumbling blocks can create a coalition to win. I don't see it yet, and I think that's the concern among a lot of Democratic operatives.
I think it is a legitimate concern, and I worry that, I know the people around Biden, you know the people around Biden, they're very smart. They've been protecting him for a long time, and there's a reason it now emerges that they've been protecting him, because letting Biden be Biden, as they did on the debate stage, didn't work very well. I mean, he was obviously well prepared for the debate, but he couldn't handle it. And, they've kept it more scripted and more protected than most presidents are. And they did it for a reason. And I worry that, quite frankly, the idea of letting Biden out there being Biden, with the press now putting him under a microscope, is going to result in more episodes of stumbling and stammering and, looking shaky on his feet. And that all of those are going to be covered in great depth. And that the more they let him loose, the worse it's going to be.
Well, I mean, some of the frustration of all of this is that, historically, every president has bombed their first debate, it seems like, re-election. And part of that was due to the prep. I think he was kind of over-prepared for that moment and way too scripted. And I think this was an element that I think was true in Hillary's campaign. I think it's true in Biden's world, is that it's okay to make a mistake, like every now and then, right? Like we can have an encyclopedic volume of mistakes that Donald Trump has made over his life, but he continues to get out there and change the narrative and drive a narrative and show people that he's got the strength and stamina, even though he's a bold-faced liar and has, epic plans to, dismantle American democracy so that he can protect his wealthy friends and himself. Like, the Democrats need to be, I think at some point, the Democrats have just got to be unabashed in their attacks on him. They've got to have the charisma and the confidence to go out there and nail him every single day and be unafraid to make a mistake. Like, if you could talk off a teleprompter, of course you're going to say something you wish you didn't say, you would have said differently. Like, move on, drive past it, like bulldoze your way through the campaign, go on the offensive and own the narrative, and we can maybe turn around these numbers. And if Biden can't do that, I suspect he can, but I think the calculation is that all of those little mistakes may lead to a very large mistake that may cost us the election, which is why I think his camp is keeping him very scripted. And again, all of this is on the premise that he's not going to have a health incident or another major mess up moment between now and the election. If either one of those things happen, it is game over for the Democrats. And I think, again, whereas if a younger person, like a Pete Buttigieg, had a medical incident, he would bounce back from it. Joe Biden would not. I mean, it's something as simple as breaking a wrist here would be terrible optics for the campaign. So there's just a lot more risk with Joe Biden, but he does have a brand that voters know and understand and appreciate. They know he's a good guy. They know he's a hard worker. They know he's delivered on the world stage. So there is a lot of strength that Joe Biden brings too. But if Joe Biden himself said there's about 50 Democrats who could beat Donald Trump in November. So, it's kind of, he's kind of, I think he's losing the case here a little bit.
Why take a risk? I'm going to play devil's advocate here right now, because I find this very difficult. I've known Joe Biden for years. I think he's a very decent man. I think he's an honorable man. I trust that he believes he's up to it. but I worry that he is just he should be way ahead of Donald Trump right now, and he's not. And you're right, it's not because voters disagree with him on policy grounds. It's because they're worried about his age and his stamina and his ability to pull this thing off. And they're more worried now, perhaps, than ever before. And I worry that, that he's going to give them more reason to worry because this is just part of his pattern. Why take these risks? If we could start fresh with a candidate who was younger and capable of turning this back into an election about Trump rather than an election about Biden.
But I think the concern here is that we haven't had time to properly vet all the other folks. I mean, yeah, they a lot of them ran for president, but not to the level and have been at the level of a nominee. And right now, I guarantee you the RNC is pulling opposition research on every single one of the people that are being thrown out there, from Governor Newsom to Gretchen Whitmer to Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg. Like, we don't know what's in their closets. And I think it's that level of unpredictability has generally in politics is what you want to avoid. Now, we are in a very different time politically where we have just a Republican nominee or presumptive nominee who has broken all the rule books in politics and somehow still survived and got renominated. And, it may be the time to just toss out the rule book here and roll the dice. I think, you saw Adam Smith, who is the ranking member of the leader of the Democrats on the Armed Services Committee, who is a very substantive, reasonable, level-headed voice in the Democratic Party. He's been leader of armed services for Democrats for a decade. My boss was on the committee with him. To see him make a dispassionate argument about why Biden should go, I'll say was compelling in the sense of, you go into this convention where you've got a representative sample of Democrats from all over the country. They have a debate, they elect a nominee, and they elect a vice president, and you come out with this enthusiasm. I think that perspective is starting to gain some momentum within the Democratic Party, because I think Jon Stewart's show on Monday night also added some fuel to the fire, which is basically where he said the American people are hungry for one of the two parties to acknowledge that we are sick and tired of this status quo. Because you go back to Clinton and Bush and Biden, it's been kind of this American, oligarchy that has led these nominations for the last, 20 years. And so, there is a dynamic shift in the campaign could be for the good, could also be for the detriment. And I think because that question remains unclear is why you're not seeing people jump to call Joe Biden to step aside.
I was worried when George Stephanopoulos asked Joe Biden how he would feel if January comes and he loses, and he gave what I thought was a terrible answer. He said as long as he had done as good a job as he could do, he would be at peace with it. And I thought that's not what this election is about. Nobody doubts that you're going to do as good a job as you can. But the question is our democracy going to survive this election? And are we putting up the candidate who, of the 50 Democrats or whatever it is, who's got the most baggage, as opposed to one without the baggage and the risks coming in? Are you being loyal because you're a loyal Democrat, or are you not worried?
Look, I'm a Democrat. I'm worried every single election. That's what we do best.
Yes.
Yeah, no, we're always worried. And back to the answer that he gave with George Stephanopoulos, I think it was universally panned as a bad answer, mainly because we've got one candidate that's running to make this election about himself. We don't need another one. And for that answer kind of struck people as like, you're making this election about you when it's not. It's about the voters and the defense of democracy here. So I think that was part of the reason why that answer really fell flat with a lot of Democrats. Look, I think I'm like.
How did that happen? He had to know that. I mean, I'm old. I go back to the, Ted Kennedy not being able to answer the Roger Mudd question of why do you want to be president? And, these are questions that you've got to be prepared to ask. I mean, his staff put him on with George Stephanopoulos for the purpose of showing that he could do it unscripted, and he proceeded to not do it unscripted. I mean, he proceeded to give the wrong answer to the most basic question you could ask him. How did that happen? What did they do?
I think he's in the bunker mentality, and when you're in the bunker mentality and feel you're getting attacked on all fronts, it's natural to want to constantly defend yourself. And I think that's where his mind instantly went, rather than focus on what's at stake and who's the people whose lives are impacted here. And so, I think he probably regrets that decision, that answer. I don't think by any means it was like a disqualifying answer. It was just not a great one. But to my question about where I personally am, I think I'm with a lot of the Democratic base of voters right now, which is where that we know the president's old, but for the first time, we're starting to see, I think, and through our eyes, that it is limiting his ability to do the job. He's even admitted so as much, and suggesting that he would go to bed earlier and take more naps during the day.
Yeah,
not exactly
crises happen at 9
feel
o'clock
better.
at night.
Right. And, again, like, I know that the president and the vice president are going to appoint Democratic justices to the bench. I know that they're going to nominate, again, qualified people to run the government. I think this is one of the most qualified and competent cabinets we've had in recent history, and among the more stable. So I'm comforted to know in that regard that the Biden-Harris administration has done a great job, and they will. But again, like, I just don't know. What I'm terrified of is, as of right now, like, I'm generally, whatever the party decides, I'll be fine with. And as a loyal Democrat, I'm going to go out and work my butt off, because at the end of the day, this is about electing a man that I believe in and a vice president who I think is terrific. But it's also about keeping Donald Trump out of the White House. So no matter what the convention comes out of and who they nominate, I'm doing everything I can to stop Donald Trump, because that's what's at stake here. And I'll add that I think that my personal problem here is suggesting we go a different course and then that course fail. It's almost like you kind of own that disaster when you should have just stuck with the horse that you initially bet on. And so I think it's because there's no clear pathway here. Like, yes, the president's old. Yes, I have concerns about his age and the ability to do the job. I think he's still on his worst day better than Donald Trump is on his best day. But I've yet to see evidence or data or a nominee emerge that I think would guarantee a successful election night in November for Democrats. And I think because that doesn't exist yet, I'm kind of torn on this. Like, I'm not going to go out there. It's also not my job as an infantry soldier to go out there and question the strategy.
I think you're more than an infantry soldier. I think you're an opinion leader.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, like, I know it sounds, this is, I think the reason why you see a lot of Democrats obfuscating is not because they're trying, honestly don't think it's because they're trying to be cute or get around the press or the questions. I think they're all struggling like I am. Like, we love Joe Biden. We think he's been a great president. I think looking back in the modern era, one of the best we've seen in terms of a domestic agenda and foreign policy, strengthening NATO, defending Ukraine, and helping hopefully bring long-term peace to the Middle East. But I think we also see what we saw Thursday night, and it has us concerned. And I don't know the best answer here. I think and I don't even have which way I'm leaning. I see the pros of keeping Joe. I see the pros of emerging with a convention with an exciting new ticket. But again, what's in their closets? What's their voting history? How are they going to respond in a debate? Because we've never seen either of them debate in a high-stakes environment like that. Could they bomb worse than Joe Biden did? These are all questions that we don't have a clear answer to. And I think as long as that water is muddy, we're going to be in this limbo here that I think in the end benefits Joe Biden.
I'm worried that the limbo benefits Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, it benefits Joe Biden in the sense of keeping the nomination. But you're right. Yes, the limbo, if this goes on past the convention, certainly going to help Donald Trump.
Yeah. And Donald Trump has got control of his party. The Republicans are a lot more disciplined than the Democrats. They're uniting behind a very flawed candidate. And if they can make this, and they want Biden. I mean, do you doubt that the Republicans want Joe Biden on the other side of this ticket?
It's hard to say, because I think I think the Republicans, I think they obviously see a weakness there, a physical weakness, but, who knows? I think they want this resolved so they can pick a VP based on what we do. I'm kind of enjoying keeping them antsy a little bit. They're certainly probably pushing back their vice presidential announcement. And I heard I was on with Bloomberg earlier, and a Republican said that this was the debate Democrats were having was embarrassing. And I just couldn't laugh, because what's embarrassing is what the Republicans are about to do next week. and that's nominate a guy with 31 felony convictions and a civil assault for a civil assault for civilly being fined civilly for sexually assaulting a woman, and they're about to elevate that guy and nominate him for the highest office of the land. You want to talk about an embarrassing thing they're going to do next week? That's embarrassing.
It should be. It should be disqualifying. And the stunning part is that it isn't, that, Donald Trump moves beyond what in conventional politics would have been, fatal missteps, and has managed to pull ahead in the polls right now. What do you think? I know we're running out of time, but what do you think of Kamala Harris? Why isn't she the logical choice? She's been around the block. She's debated in high-stakes situation. She is incredibly eloquent about the abortion issue. She runs very strong with women. I heard a CNN pollster say the other day that she's doing better with independents than Joe Biden is. Why isn't she the logical choice to lead this ticket?
Well, again, I think there's some concerns about. First of all, let me say I love Kamala Harris. I think the vice president has a very charismatic and warm personality. I think she's done a terrific job as vice president. It's a hard job to do.
Yeah, I was going to say,
don't know exactly know what you're doing. Yeah.
Vice president is.
Yeah. So, I think she's handled it well. I think she doesn't have a lot of policy chops. I think will be the Republican attack here. Again, she'd be running against the former president. She was in the Senate, for less than a decade. I think, but she does have experience as a prosecutor in California. But one of the things I really like about her is that she brings this kind of youthful energy into the Democratic Party. You look at some of the problems we had with Hillary as the nominee and Joe Biden is their past statements and votes because they've been in politics for 30 years. You don't have that with Kamala. You have someone who's been right from day one on the issue of marriage equality. She's been right from day one on the issue of choice. She's been right from day one on the issue of gun violence. That's going to resonate with the base and the young people in the party. That may be a really good opportunity, like we saw with Obama, to bring in a lot of young voters to consolidate the Black vote in this country. And hopefully, I think there was a big problem with Hillary with young women. I don't think a lot of young women liked Hillary because of her her long record or previous statements on issues like the Iraq War and stuff. But in this situation, I don't see any kind of daylight between young women and Kamala Harris here. So I think in a way you could rally the female vote in ways that Hillary couldn't or struggled to do with kind of the more progressive crowd. So she brings a lot of energy, enthusiasm, and cohesiveness among the Democratic Party. And I think next to Donald Trump, shows a lot of great energy and has shown an ability to punch through with an effective attack. Again, as we look to the debates, does her on stage next to Trump, I think there's some concern about her ability to keep up with him, to really push back Donald Trump is very tough to debate. And I think the Republicans obviously are going to point to her failure to address the immigration crisis, which I thought was a terrible thing to give her on day one.
Yeah, that was a terrible thing to do.
Yeah, why they did that. And of course, border security is what the Republicans want to be talking about right now. They don't want to be talking about Project 2025, which is this insane agenda to return to some Leave It to Beaver America, where people of color and women and LGBTQ people have no rights because we have to live up to some moralistic code of conduct that the Republicans are trying to force down on the entire American public. And with the Supreme Court now giving the president the ability to use executive action to do any number of things, I think everyone out there should go Google Project 2025 and see how dangerous it is. And what I'm mad about the media at the moment is they are trying to focus on the Trump hypocrisy about whether or not he had anything to do with it. Forget that. Get him to condemn the project, get him to tell exactly what he has a problem with in there, because he has yet to express any specific concern to any idea in Project 2025. It is a dangerous project. It is a threat to democracy. And, rule number one is they're going to come in and dismantle the civil service of the federal government. The civil service is an important protection in the preservation of democracy, because 90% of the federal government is run by the civil service servants, and they are appointed there through non-political means, and they are there for 40, 50 years. They run the government through the ups and downs of the swinging pendulum of politics. They're there based on merit and competency and not politics. To get rid of that and put in Trump sycophants, that's the beginning of the end. That's the concern.
That's the concern. Who is Project? I know we're running out of time, but who is Project 2025?
So Project 2025 is a set of ideas, very conservative ideas proposed by the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is a think tank in DC that for a long time has been kind of the forefront of the conservative ideology in Washington, in the nation. It's a very academic focused kind of think tank, but for the first time, they've understood they've got a president who will either adopt or not block what they're trying to do. And a lot of that comes from an expanded executive authority that they've not previously had. Now that the Supreme Court has said that Trump can take all kinds of risks because he has almost no criminal liability for anything. And we know the House and Senate Republicans are never going to hold him accountable for any kind of wrongdoing. Then they realize they've now got a leader who can have free reign to just administratively start passing and executing laws that just leave Congress out to dry. And the Supreme Court is not going to jump in there because they've shown an unwillingness to do so. It means we're going to have a monarch, and very quickly we're going to have a dictator. And as he said, he wants to be a dictator on day one. I think we should start listening to him and trust him at his word.
I think so too. Brad, you are as always full of great energy and great insight. And I want to thank you for joining us and for sharing it. Let me ask you one last question. What do you think, because you've spent a lot of time in down ticket races, what do you think is going to happen with the House and Senate?
I feel confident that we're going to flip the House. I think a combination of redistricting, I think the Republican chaos and their inability to show that they can govern. I think the American people are going to remember that when Hamas invaded Israel, we had no speaker for months on end. And I think when the Americans look at what they want to do between Project 2025, you look at the tax cuts the tax plan that Trump passed, it's up for renewal next year. They want to again cut taxes for the wealthy and raise them on the middle class. Unacceptable, in my opinion. So I think between that and our candidate quality, the Democratic candidates are out fundraising nearly 2-to-1 the Republican candidates on the trail. So I think candidate quality, cash advantage, redistricting, and Republicans' inability to govern is going to win us the House. I think we have a shot at the Senate. Again, look at Tammy Baldwin, look at Ruben Gallego in Arizona, Shapiro in Pennsylvania. They're all running like nearly double digits ahead of Joe Biden. And that insulation is going to be critical to make sure that they can hand a victory. And if we can hold all of those states in John Tester and Montana, another close race, if we can hold all those, I think we can hold the Senate. It's going to be close and we need a Democratic vice president, but I think we can do it.
Brad, you are a breath of fresh air. It is wonderful to talk to you, and thank you again for coming back on the show. We'll have you again.
My pleasure.
Keep up with your insights as this difficult campaign continues.
Yes, ma'am.
You've been listening to No Holding Back with me, Susan Eskridge. Thank you to Brad Howard for a great conversation. Tweet us at No Holding Back FM, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share the link on social media. You can sign up to receive an email when a new episode drops at our website, noholdingback.fm. Thank you again for listening. Thank you to Brad Howard for being a great guest, and I'll see you next time on No Holding Back.